Hi, I'm Ron Wixman, and this is a sort of follow up to the discussion I had on what is kosher. And I think one of the interesting things to look at is how people actually do things, not what's written in the holy book. Um, I came from a family. We lived in Brooklyn and in the Lower East Side, where local customs evolved around what being kosher is. For example, when you move into an apartment, how do you make the house kosher? How do you make the oven kosher? Simple. You take a brick, you put it in the oven, and you bake it. That made my family happy that now the oven was kosher. Not allowed to have blood. Well, what happens when you buy a chicken in the live chicken market in the Lower East Side? And of course, you have to check the chicken to see that it's a good one. And so you pick up the chicken, you spread its legs, you go, and you get the feathers to spread to see whether it's a good chicken, meaning that it was yellow. I never knew what it meant when I was a kid, but that was very important. None of this is in the Bible. Now, the chicken has to be killed properly. So the shochet, the ritual slaughterer, knows you have to cut the throat with one thing, hold it in the barrel, bleed it. Now, that's not good enough for the common person. Now you have to take the chicken or the meat and put it in salt water overnight. So if you're going to have chicken soup, you have to kosherize the chicken. It wasn't good enough that it was killed by the shochet, but now you have to take part in it. That's a very important thing. So now you put it in salt water to get rid of the blood. And now you can cook the meat. Then, of course, comes the idea with affluence, which my family had no idea about since we lived at the poverty level. My brother comes home from school with a friend of his who's from a middle class family, and the issue of two sets of dishes. You have to have one for milchig, meaning dairy, and one for meat. My elder relatives who were born in Eastern Europe looked at this and laughed. So then the conversation, my Aunt Frida, born in a dinky dipshit village on the Black Sea, says, you know, we were 14 people and we had four dishes and four spoons. If two of the dishes matched, we had two sets. She said, maybe in Odessa, there were rich people that had two sets of dishes. This is an interesting concept because, as I said before, you don't mix meat and milk dishes. But that's not what the original Bible was about. I discussed that already. But in the minds of people, they don't know the rule. What they know is you don't mix the two. So now in America, and perhaps in Western Europe, affluence, you have two sets of dishes. Oh, but what about Passover? Now you have to have three sets of dishes. Notice today, many Jews in the United States showing affluence have to have two stoves, two sets of pots, and now even two kitchens in some areas. Now, for my family, this was absurd. They were religious. Here's the difference. My religious relatives knew why they were being kosher. So it didn't matter whether you had two sets of dishes or not. Now, what happens with Americanization? Like me and my brother and my cousins who came to love Chinese food. Now, this is a very important thing because there was a joke among many Jewish Americans that it's Chinese food that led Jews away from being kosher. And there was a joke in Brooklyn that if there were two or more Chinese restaurants on one block, you knew it was a Jewish neighborhood. So what did you do? Like my mother and my relatives are concerned about the elder relatives. How do you keep a kosher home for them? Well, so you had paper plates so that when they came over, you could put the Chinese food on paper plates. And you accommodated in a lot of ways. So one of the big issues, of course, is with kosher is how do you do it? How do you maintain it? Now, what do you do if you're invited to an Italian friend's house? This didn't happen in Jewish villages in Poland, in Belarus, in Lithuania, and in Ukraine. Well, what about me? What about my relatives? I have Italian friends in school. I have a Chinese friend. So what do you do? Well, it's interesting. I had to ask my rabbi, how much of a sin is it? And of course, I came to realize we don't have that concept of sin that the Catholic friends of mine did. Well, do I eat in their house? If so, I have to be a good guest. The laws of sodomy have nothing to do with sex, it's hospitality. I have to be a good host and offer food and drink to my guests. And of course, be aware if they're Jewish, it should be kosher at the time. But what if I go to my Italian friend's house? So I had to choose. Am I going to break the laws of Sodom and be a bad guest and say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't eat your food? Or do I eat it? My rabbi gave me the solution, which I never knew. It's not a big sin. It's not a big deal. What I had to do was take a ritual bath and say a prayer, the Shmona Esrei, and I'm ritually pure again. And the other thing is, if you're not kosher, you're not supposed to eat with other people who are kosher. And let me end on this point. When my rabbi asked the class, when is pork kosher? Most of my friends said, never. To which he said, no. In Auschwitz, pork was kosher. Kosher is when you can do it. If you can't, there are accommodations. So there.